Welcome to our seminar series on the latest in color workflows, Color Update 2008. I'm your host today, Brent Haley, founder of Left Hand Man Productions, a video production company focused on graphic arts technologies and workflows. With over 20 years experience working for companies like Aldus, Adobe, Pantone, and Apple, I have seen the world of digital color evolve. We are here today at Left Hand Man Studios in San Jose to give you the latest update on color, including interviews with HP and X-Rite, a demo of the new calibration product, Color Monkey. We'll show you the latest in graphic application color setup, including Aperture 2, Photoshop CS3, and Quark 7, as well as a demo of HP's new photo printer and software. Now, before we get started, we really need to sit and talk about why we should care about this whole color matching and calibration thing. If you're a graphic designer or photographer making imagery decisions or using a monitor to design for color printing, then you need to start considering color management and how to deal with that on a color digital workflow basis. Every day, designers and photographers are expected to do more and more of the production or color workflow, delivering everything from web-based imagery to final printed product photography. Color calibration and color management are crucial in making this a reality. But first, let's talk a little about the current trends in today's market. It's a mature market, which means companies are consolidating and collaborating technologies. There are fewer tools with better technology inside of them, and it also is less confusing for you on which actual thing you need to buy. Now, there's also brand new applications, the new updated OS from Apple, along with the Pro Photo RGB color space, and dealing with raw image formats if you're shooting a digital SLR. And how do we work those things into our color workflow? And cost for the quality technology that you actually get inside of a device is substantially lower. Under $3,000 to get a large format photo printer, and less than $700 get you a 13 by 19 desktop color archival printer. 2007 has brought a lot of great changes in the market in each of these areas, and we're going to go through these in more detail inside the seminar. To make it easier, I've broken it down into three major areas: screen calibration, applications and workflows, and printer calibration and output. So to get started down the path, the first thing we have to talk about is setting up the operating system and color settings. So the first thing to talk about in the color workflow is really talking about input. Now, that might be a scanned image, a digital camera, or maybe something that you bought off the internet, like an image from a photo stock agency. It doesn't really matter. What we need to start thinking about in a color workflow is what color space is that in. So in a digital camera like this, you might not know, but there's a menu setting for color space usually on most of these cameras today. And what you need to do is dial down and see what you can select. Now, most of them are set on sRGB, and that is the smallest color space that you can work with. So let's get more color in our life, right? Let's go up to Adobe RGB 1998, or if you have a new camera, you might even get Pro Photo RGB 1998. Now, what do all these color spaces mean? Well, to show that, let's actually jump into the computer and talk about the ColorSync utility. It's the best way to show the difference of color spaces. And you can get this in your utility folder instead of Mac OS X utilities. And I'm just going to show you different color spaces. Now, we talked about sRGB. And this is a visual representation of that color space. You see I can move it around. And then I can hold it for selection or for comparison, and then select Adobe 1998. Now you can see it's a little bit bigger. Well, it's a little bit hard to see that, so let's go backwards. Let's go from Adobe 1998, hold for comparison, and then put in sRGB. You'll notice that the gray area is the Adobe RGB profile, and the smaller area is the sRGB. It is actually a smaller color space. So if you start with that color, you're actually going to have less colors as you go along the color workflow. So let's go with Adobe RGB 1998. I can select that. Now, I mentioned another color space, and that was the Pro Photo RGB color space. As you can see, I've selected it, and it's so big I can't even see it on the screen. So I am going to scale it back so I can actually see the color space. I'll hold this one for comparison also. And let's go back up to Adobe RGB. So you can see ProPhoto RGB is a much larger color space. Now, let's step back and talk a little bit again about formats. We talked about color spaces, but what about actual camera formats? A lot of people are shooting in what they call RAW format. And that's great because it captures all of the color and all of the information that it can from that CCD inside of the camera, right? Now, RAW has no color space applied to it. So when it is captured, it doesn't matter what your camera is set on. So if it's set on sRGB or Adobe RGB, it doesn't really matter. So on import, it's going to be important for us to actually tag that image and talk about the profiling. But at that point, you might want to deal with ProPhoto RGB color space because it is so much bigger. And you have all that color calibration information in the raw image that you took from the camera. Now, how do we get that information in? So I can either plug the camera directly into the computer. I can use a CF card on my flash drive. Maybe if you want a Bluetooth in, you can do that also. But once you plug it in, what happens? Does it go into iPhoto? Does it go into Aperture or Lightroom, whatever application you have, Preview? How do we set that up? Well, we actually use an application called Image Capture. Just to go into my Applications folder, scroll down, and grab Image Capture. Now, this is an actual application, not a utility, so you won't find it in the Utilities folder. And that's a big difference. With an application, all the developers can actually use this application and write to it. It is actually used by all the different devices to bring that information into the computer. Now I can open up Image Capture and I can set up some different preferences. I can set up when a camera is connected, not only a camera, but it could be scanner, iPhone, whatever. I can open up different applications. I can even go into Other and scroll down and say I wanted to open up Lightroom for whenever my camera is actually plugged in. I can set that up directly here in Image Capture. So I'm going to switch this back to Image Capture, close it, and then let's plug in our CF card and we'll get some more preferences inside of Image Capture. Once I plug in a card or a camera, it brings up Image Capture window, but now it gives me other options. I can download the pictures to another folder if I want to. I can even bring in an automated task. You notice that I've actually created an automated task here with Automator, another program that you can use to really increase your productivity in color workflow. I can select the Aperture Import Keyword task, which I actually built out of Automator, or I can select some of the other preset ones. It just gives me more options if I go ahead and get through Image Capture and not through some other application. Now, I can select options, and I can also embed a color sync profile. Now, remember, if I have an older camera or say a scanner, if I wanted to use the same setting, I might not have an actual profile for that, and I want to embed a profile right from the beginning in my workflow so that it stays consistent throughout the whole workflow. And I can select this. I've selected ProPhoto RGB because I'm going to deal with raw images, and I want to use that larger color space for my workflow. Let's say OK. And then I can download all, or I can download some of these files if I want to directly from Image Capture. So it does give me a little bit more flexibility than just going into a single application. But I can do that also. It really doesn't matter how I get my files in there, as long as I start getting them in and I deal with what the color space is from those actual pieces. Now I've downloaded some images for our demonstration today into a folder on my desktop. And I have a few different projects here that I've worked on. I can't really see a big thumbnail here, but these are Photoshop files. I've got some TIFF files. I've also got some Nikon RAW files. Now, I can open these up in Photoshop, Lightroom, or whatever program, but maybe I just wanted to get a quick look at these or see what they look like. I can use Preview right in the OS, or say I was sending it to someone and they didn't have Photoshop, they could look at it at Preview. So I can go Open, or I can open with Preview. Now, right now the default is Photoshop CS3, so maybe I want to change that default to Preview. Well, to do that, grab one of these images, go to Information, where it says Open With, select Other, scroll down or type in Preview, and say Always Open the application for Nikon electronic format files, add that, and then what's important is to say Change All. So you can change all the .nef files to open with Preview. Now if I go back and say Open With, it'll open with Preview and default is selected. So let's open up this Nikon RAW file. And this works with Nikon, Canon, any RAW files that you want to actually shoot. Now, I've opened it up inside of Preview. I'm going to select General Information. We see that it's a Nikon RAW image. Nice size, 19 megabytes. We've got a nice pixel ratio. You'll notice that there is a color sync profile attached to this file. Now, just to clarify here again, because it's very important, when you shoot on a digital SLR and you're shooting in a JPEG workflow, you will have to select some kind of camera profile or camera color space, either in your menu or on import where we talked about image capture. Now, if you're shooting a RAW file, I don't care what it is, Canon, Nikon, doesn't matter, color space has not been applied yet. So this file has not been processed, and we don't know what color space is actually going to be selected for this file and information. But here in Preview, it says that I have an Adobe RGB profile attached. Don't pay attention to it. Some of the other applications do it also. It has to give it something to preview it on screen, right? It has to know where it's coming from. So it's just giving it and using a default of Adobe RGB 1998. That's what the Mac OS does automatically because color sync is always turned on and always working in the OS. So now that I have this file, I can do lots of different things with this file. Turn the inspector off. I can adjust color if I want to. And this is right on a RAW file. I want to change the temperature, change the exposure of the file, brightness. All easy to do right inside of Preview because it's using the core graphics engine of the Mac OS. So I can make these changes right inside Preview and then save this out. I don't need to go to a Photoshop or another big program if I'm just making minor adjustments. And I'm going to go back to our folder of images. Now say I wanted to even take a quicker look at some information on my desktop. Leopard has added in a new feature called Quick Look. I can select on it, and anything that I select on the screen, it'll come up in this Quick Look window. Nikon RAW file, TIFF file, Photoshop file, a few different ones here, all getting loaded very quickly right in what we call Quick Look. Now, I can also bring in other kinds of media. Say I have a video that I brought in. It's just overlaid direct liner. This is our old color update video that we have. And I can scroll anywhere I want inside the video, right inside of Quick Look. I haven't even opened up QuickTime or any other application. Another great way to actually start working with these photos. Now, how does that work in color? Well, the OS, as I said, is always color managed. Color management is always turned on. So in Preview, Safari, Mail, all kinds of applications that you're working with, if you have that image tagged, it's going to be using color sync, going to be working with the image profile that came in, and working with your screen calibration. Screen calibration. That leads us to the next section that we're going to talk about is managing your screen. As I said, the first major area in color management is screen calibration. I don't care what screen you're using, whether an ISO or Apple Cinema display, you should be worried about color calibrating that screen. Well, X-Rite has come out on top as the major player in color calibration and color management by acquiring multiple companies in 2007, including Greytag Macbeth and also Pantone. They are really now the 800-pound gorilla of color management. Now, this is to be expected in a mature market. Companies are going to collaborate, come together, merge, acquire, whatever you want to call it, but they're going to create specific products for more specific tasks or workflows. This is both good for consumers and professionals alike. So let's bring on our first guest, Liz Quinless, who you might remember from my last show and is now with X-Rite. So welcome, Liz. I really appreciate you coming and being on the show again this year.
Hi, Brent. Thanks for having me back.
Great. Now, last time you were here, you were with another company, and we talked about merger then. We have some other things to talk about. So give us just a state of the company and what's happening with X-Rite and some of these other acquisition mergers that you've had over the year.
Sure. So actually, over the last year and a half, we combined X-Rite and Greytag Macbeth, which was great for the company because we were able to take our R&D and combine it to bring new products to market. And we have a new product that we're going to talk about today that is a direct result of that. And we actually, last year, also acquired Pantone, which is really good for the company in the fact that it extends our markets out to the designer space and other markets where X-Rite didn't have a presence. So we're really anxious about being able to leverage that Pantone name and get it out there.
And that's a lot of technology. I mean, because you have, X-Rite had some specific markets that they were in, Graytech, of course, and Pantone. And you're kind of folding in those other, because you really are a larger company and focusing on a lot of different markets.
Absolutely. I mean, the nice thing about X-Rite, Pantone combined is that we're actually able to go after our traditional industrial markets. So this is part of the X-Rite side that goes after automotive and textile, et cetera. But also in our graphic arts side, it's all the digital workflow. So we're able to now go from end to end, designer, photographer, pre-press to the press room, and everything is a seamless workflow for our customers.
And how has that been going? I mean, and I can say it's been going well from my perspective, because you have a new product out under the new company moniker, which is fantastic, and very quickly after the whole merger. So I think it's going well. So anything that you can say about how it's going and how things are going to be broken out, or is it all going to be one company?
Oh, I think that we're doing some research on exactly how we're going to put the companies together, so that over the next few months we'll probably have some more announcements about that. But then I think that really the best part of the companies is the fact that we are able to take the technologies from these different organizations and quickly bring things to market that are really going to be specific to the market and broadening to different users so that they have access to these products at a better price point.
And we're going to talk about the products, but let's get down to the business that we really want to talk about, and that's your new product, Color Monkey, a great name, which I want you to say a little bit about first, is how the name came about, because I think it's one of the more interesting names for a product I've seen lately. So tell me about that.
Actually, Color Monkey, it was very interesting because, as you know, X-Rite is a technical company, and we're used to having names like i1 or something that is more technically around like a CI5. And we wanted something that going after a market that really is more ownable and personable to the end user, so they could also feel some level of, I want to have that, and it's mine, and it's fun, and it's easy to use. So Color Monkey really came about because we want to talk about versatility, ease of use, and I think that when our end users see this product, they'll see that that really does hit the mark.
So who is the specific person or market, I should say, I guess it's kind of both, who are the specific person that you're really targeting this product towards?
Well, we actually have two products that we brought to market. One's Color Monkey Design and one Color Monkey Photo. And the design is obviously going after the designer market, primarily the graphic art designers. And in the photography space, we've actually been very successful in reaching the top tier commercial photographers, fine art photographers with our i1 product line. And what we really saw was a need for our wedding, social, portrait photographers, as well as all of those advanced prosumers, the amateurs that really want to get into photography, with something that is easy to use, that it doesn't seem daunting as far as being able to implement it in a workflow and be able to afford it too. So this is really the target market for this. So
you do have somewhat of a stepping stone then of a product line now where you're going all the way from, and we'll talk about, I guess we can talk about the Huey versus the Color Monkey versus the i1, correct?
Absolutely, and each one fits a specific market need for the level of the user and what their particular needs are in their particular workflow.
So we have an individual product for photo, an individual product for design, and we'll look at those a little bit later, but I've noticed that you've actually brought the Color Monkey Photo with you.
I did, Brent. This is actually the device. It's very cool. It's very small and compact. It does everything that you would want it to do for your photographic workflow. It's got a dial in the middle that actually gives me access to the different functions. So on the top you see I have an ambient light reading, so I can do my ambient light reading for my monitor calibration. I can do digital projectors. There's a sensor here that I can actually measure my digital projectors. We've put a built-in white calibration tile down in the corner so you don't have to worry about losing it or matching it up with another device. And then down at this very bottom function, we actually are able to do calibration for your printers, your monitors, and even spot color measurement. There's actually a little spot target foot here. And the technology does both CMYK, RGB printers, and I think that the great thing about the solution is that it's not just about the hardware device. There's a whole lot more software applications that are included. So we're going beyond just color management. There's creation tools. There's a digital pouch communication tool for sending your images to your clients so that they can see it properly calibrated on their screen too. So I think it's really cool. USB powered, small, compact, take it with you wherever you go.
It has to be one of the better designs I've seen for a color calibration solution, I'll say, because and we'll show it a little bit later, but actually showing everything from the actual device with the twirling wheel is fantastic because you go to all your different levels of what you want to do, all your different functionalities just by turning the wheel into a different position. I think you guys did a great job, especially with combining the companies, merging with other acquisitions, and now coming out with this great product to satisfy this market. Now, for that, you do have two other products, and give us an idea and our viewers the difference between going with the Huey Pro, some of your other screen calibrators, the Monkey, and also the i1.
Okay, so we have a Huey Pro and a Huey device, which is a monitor calibration solution, and it's really a starting point for those that really just are looking for good color on their screen to start out with. And we move up to an i1 display solution, which is part of our i1 solution line, so monitor calibration, which gives you more functionality, matching monitors to monitors in workgroup situation. And now we have the Color Monkey in the middle that actually does everything that I just talked about, from monitor calibration to printer. And then we also have our high-end i1 Pro system, which is still very viable in the market for those that are doing fine art reproduction or really in the high-end production environments. So those that are looking to do many, many, many patches of color to measure to a much tighter degree of quality. That's what the i1 position's at.
Awesome. So you guys are doing a great job with the new products. So sounds like the companies are going well. You guys are moving forward. We're in 2008. So anything you can point us to, or what's coming out from X-Rite new in the next few months?
Well, I think that primarily we'll be focusing on the Color Monkey, as we just launched it about a week ago.
Yeah.
And I think that you'll see this throughout the country, throughout the world. Actually, it's a global product. And we're really looking forward to being in seminars and different activities going on. And I think that anyone that's really interested in more about this, they can go to colormonkey.com and they'll see exactly where they can see a Color Monkey in action.
Great. Well, thanks again, Liz, for all the information and, of course, your time for being here on the show. Our audience definitely appreciates it, as I do. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Brent.
As you can see, X-Rite has a complete product offering from the consumer side, the Huey, their new product, the Color Monkey, all the way to the Pro with the i1. So let's take a look at screen calibration and see the Color Monkey in action. Now, the next step is to talk about screen calibration. And you have multiple options, everything from doing visual calibration, which we'll show with just the OS, all the way to using multiple devices. Now, really, as we mentioned before, screen calibration and color management is a mature market. And in the last year, we've seen a lot of companies merge, acquire, combine technologies, and now we have companies really delivering technologies that are specific for our tasks. So if you're not doing any screen calibration at all, you might want to start with a smaller item like the Pantone Gray Tag branded item right now, which will become X-Rite as they just got acquired, but called the Huey or the Huey Pro. Now, this is a small calibrator, very pencil thin. It sticks onto a LCD screen or a MacBook Pro if you want to. It has an ambient light checker, which is probably the newest thing in color calibration and screen calibration, is being able to check the ambient light of your room or your settings, right, of what's happening in your workspace. About $90. Now, like I said, what you pay for is what you get in calibration. It's about $90 worth of technology in there. The light reading meter, all of the technology, about $90. Now, X-Rite has also introduced another product called Color Monkey. Now, this is a pretty innovative product. It has a wheel that allows me to spin it into different positions, and that allows me to do everything from the top position of ambient light checking to calibrating my screen, all the way down to measuring color, which we'll show in a minute. But running about $500, kind of the all-in-one tool, and they have one for photo and one for design. Now, if you want to go a step further, you can go with the i1 Pro. It's about $1,200 and allows you not only to do the screen, but allows me to print out patches on any paper from any printer and actually develop a profile for it by reading them in. So a higher-end product. Well, let's go ahead and actually go into the computer and talk more about setting up to start to actually get to profile the screen. Now, to do that, let's go into the OS, into the system preferences, and look at displays. You'll notice for the taping purposes, we have two cinema displays hooked up here. And if I look at arrangement, they're mirrored. Not a problem, but if you have a PowerBook or MacBook Pro and you're connecting it to an external display, make sure that the right display is selected by moving this white bar back and forth when you actually go ahead and start profiling. Now, if I select the color in one of these displays, you'll notice that the display profile is Cinema HD. Now, this is the actual default profile from the factory. Now, I can calibrate inside of the OS. This is a visual calibration using your eyes. Now, we're humans, organisms, right? We don't have the best eyes for accurate or consistent calibration. Something you eat or drink the night before will change what you're looking at or the way you view color. So it's better, if you're a professional or you really need to have a color workflow, is to start using one of the tools that we talked about, everything from the $90 all the way up to the $1,200 calibrators. I'm going to close out of this and go back into ColorSync Utility. And bring up Adobe RGB. And again, I'm going to hold that for comparison. And this is what we've decided on, or ProPhoto RGB, we've decided on as our consistent color model for all of our images. Now, if I overlay that with the Cinema HD display, you notice that the Cinema HD is actually a little bit smaller than Adobe RGB. So they fit within each other. But again, they're different sizes. This proves why we need color management and why ColorSync exists. Because it's transforming your image that is in Adobe RGB color space, and it's shrinking, expanding, moving that color so that it then views correctly in the Cinema HD profile. And then as we move down the line, how does it look inside the applications? And then how does it print on the printer profile? That's why profiles are so important, and they're the descriptors of each piece of the puzzle. This gives you more of a visual representation of why that is needed and how it works. Let's go out and actually calibrate the display now, and we'll have a new profile that we can look at in a minute. To do that, I'm going to use the Color Monkey, a brand new device from X-Rite, and I'm going to use Color Monkey Design, it's the white one, and there's Color Monkey Photo, which is the black version. They have different softwares that we can use, but I'm just going to bring up the Profile My Display. Again, what's nice about this software, it actually tells me that I have two displays connected. Which one do I want to calibrate? I'm going to use the primary display, follow the button saying next. I'm going to go ahead and do advanced. I can select my default. I'm going to go D65 and just say next. And now it's going to tell me that my Color Monkey is connected, and now we need to actually calibrate the device itself so it has a starting point. So I just turn down the wheel, tells me to calibrate, and now what it's doing is actually calibrating to a white tile that is inside the device. Very similar to the i1, which actually comes with a white tile that you place the device onto. This was actually built in. Well, it looks like we are calibrated, and now it's telling me to move into position. That's the correct position by moving down the dial. And it's going to tell me to place the Color Monkey here. Well, to do that, I need to put it in the bag so that it can hang off of my screen. And next, I'm going to do a series of patches. And as you can see here, it's throwing the color on the screen, and the Color Monkey is actually reading every one of these patches and creating a profile for this screen and what it's actually displaying in its color. Now the profile is complete, and I can take the Color Monkey back off of the screen. And it tells me if I want to remind me of this profile every week. I think that's a little excessive. I usually tell people that they probably want to calibrate or recalibrate their display once a month unless something drastically changes, right? Unless your lighting changes, unless you move your display, you're changing drapery, whatever. If something changes in your environment, you want to recalibrate your display. Select 4 weeks and go to Next. And we can see that there is the before and the after for each one of these pieces. And now we'll go back into ColorSync Utility. And as you can see here in the ColorSync Utility, it's actually given us a different display, D65, which we selected. And you can see I can change that between the two displays. And there is a difference between the actual profile. This one is customized for my profile and my settings. Now, there's a lot of other things that the Color Monkey can do. Let's look at a few of those. As you can see, I can go in and look at some of my different iPhoto libraries if I want to. If I look in our Aperture library, I can scroll down, see some of the images that are here, and I can actually get a color palette for each one of those images that I'm looking at. If I select one, you can see I have different color palettes that I can work with, and it grabs all of that information directly out of the image. I can also create a brand new color palette of my own. I'm going to select the Color Monkey and actually go to View Measurements. And I'm going to take the Color Monkey out of the bag, keep it in the measurement mode, and now I can click on any color I want to anywhere, say on my shirt. I'm going to go and get a nice gray or a brown. Anywhere I click, it's going to give me a measurement and actually start measuring that color for me. So not only does the device allow me to calibrate my screen, it allows me to go ahead and take measurements of color and create palettes from images or from physical items. And I can also use the same device to go ahead and print out a patch and profile on my printer and go ahead and read that back in. So a very versatile device. Go ahead and start working in screen calibration. Now, let's go back into one of my images. Say I want to use a quick look at it. And now when I'm looking at this image, not only is it going to look at the actual photo and the profile that is included in it, it's now going to be able to view it in a calibrated space on my monitor. This is really the first step in doing anything in a color workflow, is getting this screen calibrated. Now I can move on and talk about applications and printers. Now the next step is to talk about applications and setting those up for the correct color workflow. Let's do a quick recap of what we've done so far. We've actually selected our input device, either camera, scanner, CF card, it doesn't matter. But when they're coming in, we've decided what our color space is going to be for our workflow, being sRGB, Adobe RGB 1998, or even if you're working with RAW and you want to go to the ProPhoto RGB or the largest color space around right now. It doesn't matter, but you have to stay consistent. So as we go from into the applications, each application should be set up exactly the same. So when you transfer the image from application to application or along your workflow, you're not changing the color. Every time you go into a different working space or a different color profile, you're going to be changing or modifying that color. Remember on the Color Sync utility, we saw how sRGB was a different size than Adobe RGB, a different size than the profile monitor. That's what Color Sync does, is it melds and changes those. So now we have to go into the applications and set them up correctly. The first one that we're going to look at, of course, is what everybody's using, Photoshop CS3. And I'm actually going to select it without any photos open and bring up color settings. This will set it for all images that are going to be opened. Now you'll notice that the default setting is North America General Purpose 2. What does that mean? Well, if we're talking about a working space, you can see here that it's going to try and put your images into an sRGB working space. Again, the smallest of color working spaces. But I can go up and select other working spaces. Adobe RGB 1998, if that's what you want to select. Remember, we're going to go with a ProPhoto RGB workflow, so I'm going to select ProPhoto RGB. It really doesn't matter on the CMYK side what you're going to use, because we're never going to convert it to CMYK. And I always like to preserve and embed profiles. Let's say OK. And now let's go back out to the desktop and open up an image. I'm just going to bring up this TIFF. Let's drag it onto Photoshop. Now, if it's already in Adobe RGB 1998 or ProPhoto RGB, it's not going to ask for any changes. It's just going to open up this file. And if I look at the bottom, I can twirl out and show the document profile that is actually attached to this file. And that's the Adobe RGB 1998 profile. So now the other settings inside of Photoshop that you want to be aware of are the actual on-screen proofing settings. So I'm going to go up to Proof Setup and select Custom. And the device to simulate, or the device that I want to actually view on screen, is the device that I'm actually printing to at the very end. Let's scroll down. And I'm going to bring up some of our HP devices. We have multiple HP printers here in the studio today. But I'm going to go with the DesignJet 3100. That's my 12 ink printer. And I'm going to select the paper that I'm actually going to be printing on. Very important to select the paper on all of these dialogues inside of the apps. It makes a huge difference because that's what we've profiled our device for. And I can tell it to simulate the paper color on screen. You'll see that it's actually darkened it up a little bit because this is a satin, not a high gloss, and it will darken up a little bit. Now, inside of Photoshop, I'm actually using the screen calibrated profile, the image profile, and I'm telling Photoshop to preview on screen what it will look like printed out on my printer profile. So using all these devices to get an accurate display of what my image is. Now I can start doing all of my color changes, all of my exposure changes or any of my color tools or painting that I want to do, and it'll be accurate to what I'm going to get out on my print. Now, if I'm just using Photoshop, that's fantastic. I can save this file. I can tell it to embed the color profile if I want to, which I always want to do, depending on what profile I'm using, because if I go to the next step, InDesign Quark Express, I want it to pick up that profile and now use it from Photoshop. Maybe I'm using a different application. There are a lot of them out there to deal with other kinds of formats, especially for shooting RAW, like Lightroom or Aperture. Let's start off with Lightroom. And if I bring it up, I've got some thumbnails of different photos that I'm working with from the California State Parks. I can select any one of these in the library, and let's go directly over into the print dialog box. And as I scroll down, you notice that I have a color management area that I can start working with, and I can see what the profiles are. Well, I can go ahead and select any one of my different profiles. I definitely don't want this to be managed by the printer. I want to use Lightroom or the application managed colors on all of these settings, and that's actually what's recommended by HP also. But I'm going to select the Design Jet 3100 and the paper that I've actually got corrected. Now, we have to select Page Setup and make sure that we have everything set up correctly and we're formatted for the exact printer. Now, I'm going to go into the Design Jet and select the 3100. And as you can see, I can select the actual page size that I want to work with. And I say, okay, pretty easy to start working with. Now I want to go into Print Settings. 2 different dialog boxes inside of Lightroom. Select the printer that I want to work with, the 3100. And now I can scroll down and you'll notice there's a small line in between Layout, Color Matching, Paper Handling, Cover Page, and Scheduler. And the next one is Color Options. This is actually the difference between the system preferences and the actual driver preferences. We want to make sure that we go into the driver preferences, into the color options, and we can decide whether we want to do application managed color or printer managed color. Now remember, we're dealing with photographs, we are controlling the color workflow, so we want the application to manage those colors. Select application managed colors, and then go back in and select image quality. And this is the next area where we need to select the paper type. It's very important, and as you can see, there are multiple different paper types that actually ship with the HP drivers. But I'm doing the HP Professional Satin Photo Paper. If I was to select a different profile, it would look totally different on the printer. And that's because I've actually calibrated or profiled my printer and my paper to get an exact match. I'm going to change my quality options. I can sit with standard. I'm going to actually go to custom and select best and go with maximum detail. I can select gloss enhancer. I'm going to say econo mode and save. And then let's go ahead and print this directly out of the file. And I've got all my settings. So everything's set up inside of Lightroom so that I can view it on screen and print it directly out to my printer. So again, we're staying with the exact color model and the exact color profile all along the workflow. Now, another product that we can work with in between Photoshop and maybe a design application is Aperture. Now, Aperture is a great application to manage your photos, organize them, and do some slight detail even on a TIFF, JPEG, or on a RAW image, some of the RAW images that we're using here from the California State Parks. Now, remember with a RAW file, there's no color space that's been applied to it. So I really need to focus on some of these raw image applications like Aperture and Lightroom on how the image comes in and how they're exported. So again, on the input, it's very important to know what profile has been applied to the image, either with image capture or the actual camera. Now, once I import it, it's inside of Aperture. I can go to metadata, and I've actually added the ability to look at color space and profile name just by going into EXIF. And as it comes up, I can scroll down and decide whether I want to turn profile name on or off for all of my images. So I can see this is Adobe RGB 1998. Now remember, it's a RAW file, so there actually hasn't been anything applied to it. They're just using this so you can actually view it on screen and do some on-screen proofing with your calibrated screen. So inside of Aperture, the first thing to set up is your presets and your image export. As I scroll down here, You'll notice that I can send out some PSD files, original, and that color sync profile, same as what we saw in Photoshop, right, in the general defaults, is set for sRGB. Just like inside Photoshop CS3, when we had the general defaults and we changed that from a small color space, sRGB, to a larger color space, say Pro Photo RGB. I'm going to do that again here. Maybe I don't want to add black point compensation just yet on export. Probably want to do that when I actually print the file. I can keep the original size, and then I can add this as a copy, and I'm going to rename it Pro Photo RGB and say OK. Now, whenever I want to export this photo, select it, go up to File, and say Export Version. I have an export preset where I actually can select Pro Photo RGB. So I'm going from a raw image, and I'm going to export it to Photoshop or somewhere else, and I'm tagging that and converting it to Pro Photo RGB right at that point. We have some other preferences that we might want to look at dealing with color, and that's talking about export. And that's choosing your external image editor. I'm going to go ahead and go out to Photoshop CS3 and select that as my image editor out of Aperture. So now, as I'm going in and back, I can actually select that. And again, I need to make sure I select my image export preset. I'm going to go back up to Photoshop original size and select Pro Photo RGB. So now I have a consistent workflow. If I decide to go into Aperture, I can go in and then edit in Photoshop and have it save back out and keep the same color space and same color profile across the whole workflow. Now, the last area in Aperture is dealing with on-screen proofing. Going to View, and I'm going to go down to my proofing profile, and again, this is where I want to select, just like in Photoshop and Lightroom, my output device. So I'm going to scroll down to the Z3100, and I'm going to select my professional satin photo paper, and that's Gloss Enhancer on, and that's the actual on-screen proof or profile that I want the calibrated display and Aperture to give back to me. So now, when I'm doing any editing, any exposure changes again, what I'm seeing on the screen is going to be what I'm going to get in my final output or print. So now you can do accurate color editing. So let's toggle over to Quark Express, and I'm going to close and hide all of my other applications. So now you've taken your image out of some other application that you've edited in, Photoshop, Lightroom, or Aperture. It doesn't matter. The important thing is that you've tagged that image with the image profile. Again, I don't care as long as it's consistent to all of your other applications. And now we're going to the next step, and you want to read in that photo or image and have that image actually profiled or attached with a profile. So then we go into Quark Express, and there's a few things you want to set up. One is going into Color Setups and Source. Now there's some defaults here. I'm actually going to create a new one and say that all of my pictures coming in, and we scroll all the way down, are actually Pro Photo RGB, and that's how I want to deal with them. All of my solid colors, I can just deal with Adobe RGB if I want to. It doesn't matter. And I'm going to manage from RGB sources to RGB destinations. And let's set that up. We can edit if we want to and name it Pro Photo RGB and save this. Now, when we say New Project, I can open it up and I can drag in and bring in any photo that I want, and it's going to be able to go directly out and print it. And that brings us to our next topic, which is about setting up your printers and output devices. The last major area is printing and output. The industry leader in printing, HP, has taken their technologies and come out with a new medium and large format printers, specifically for photographers and graphic designers. Because these are cost-effective, highly productive, with archival ink sets, they bring professional print production to the masses. Our guests today are Ben Wolf and Tom Hubbard, the faces of professional printing products for HP. Ben and Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Brett.
Well, let's start off first, Tom, with you, who is here really to talk about the B-Series printer. And give me an idea, the B9180, the first one in the product line, where that's positioned and where kind of HP was thinking that market would be for that printer.
Might actually be helpful to define B size here too. From a photographer standpoint, that's kind of a foreign term. So B size in HP terms is any printer that can print up through 13 by 19 in size. So the thought here was that this particular printer, the 9180, could cover sizes from 4x6 up through 11x14s, for example, which photographers use so much. The B-size printer, the 9180 in particular, has been out for about 18 months now, late in 2006. It is our smallest of our pigment printer family, which goes from the B9180 and its 13x19 size all the way up through the Z printers and the 44-inch capabilities. So the family shares a whole base of technologies that's common throughout.
So talk to me a little bit about the technology inside the B series 9180 printer.
Yeah, that's where this particular printer is really unique in the marketplace. HP scientists have created and are making true on the promise of helping our customers, especially in the more difficult areas of color management. So the B9180 incorporates a densitometer, which allows the individual to actually color balance their machine. And that will help us live up to our promise to help you in color management if you'll do one thing for us. And if you'll color calibrate that monitor, we can help you make that perfect print. What you see on the monitors, what you'll see on the final output. The other real major issue as we developed this machine was clogging of pigment inks. That is their downfall. They're known for clogging. A lot of printers have this problem. HP incorporated technology called electrostatic drop detection. And using this technology, the printer is always on. It is always maintaining itself down to the level where it's actually looking at every individual nozzle in the print head itself and cleaning down to that level. So we have virtually eliminated the problems that are common with pigment printers in the area of clogging.
Now, pigment printers, which is a great thing to talk about because this is your new ink set, and we'll talk a little bit about this later and dive into it, but so better print heads, your new ink set, which is the Vivera ink set, and all of this, less mess and easy to actually maintain as a user, right? Because I think that's important.
That's right.
To state is, 13x19 archival, but so I can actually change the print heads and the inks myself?
You can change the print heads and the inks individually. There's no ganging of cartridges. Each head contains 2 colors, so there are 4 heads in this machine since it's an 8-color machine. Those print heads are user interchangeable. They plug in and out just like the ink cartridges do. So from a user standpoint, it's very maintainable, very inexpensive. Even if they do have to replace a head, it's much less expensive than sending the whole machine back to a factory and having those heads replaced.
And I've also got 13x19, photo satin, which is my favorite, of course. But then I can do archival quality. I can have a nice sheet fed through this to actually do canvas.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. One of the features is what we call the specialty media tray, which I'm sure you'll show later. The specialty media tray allows you to use almost virtually any fine art paper, and it'll maintain a flat, smooth paper path so that there is no curl involved in the final print, which is a major issue with fine art papers, primarily because they're so thick. And if they're in a roller, they go around a roller, they maintain that curl. They have a long memory for that.
Yeah, I printed out a lot of that canvas, and I really enjoyed it.
Canvas is one of our more popular ones, along with Hahnemühle Smooth Fine Art. Both of those have been real good sellers, very well accepted by our users.
Now at Macworld, you made another announcement in this series of printers, the 8850. Tell me a little bit about that and how that differs from the 9180, because they're similar in price. They look very similar form factor. What are my differences?
The differences are, well, you need to know that the 9180 was created with the advanced amateur through the professional in mind. That was the market it was intended for. All of the features that are included on the 9180 were really asked for by our customers, our professional customers. We realized that we were leaving out a huge segment of the market, and that's those beginning DSLR users, up through the people who are just beginning to consider themselves serious amateurs. So this printer is aimed at those people. In particular, the differences are the connectivity of the unit. The 9180, the big brother, has the capability of being connected to your computer either through a USB connection or through Ethernet, which I think is what you've got set up here and you'll be showing later.
Correct.
The 8850, which is the new printer and was announced at Macworld, is only connected, it's a direct connect through USB. So for users who don't have networks at home and have no need for that, the USB really fills that role. There's a little bit of difference on the front panel. The 8850 doesn't have an LCD display, but in turn, all of the functions that you would have found on the LCD display are now displayed on the monitor and in front of the user, which is very convenient since in those cases, generally the printer is sitting right next to the monitor that the user. In the case of the Ethernet connections, and one of the reasons the B9180's LCD display is important is that printer could be remote. So all the functions you can perform off away from your computer.
So really one B9180 more situated for that prosumer, professional work group kind of scenario. This really fits that need of that individual person, individual photographer,
right.
really getting that. But same technology inside,
exactly the same
inks?
technology. Everything inside is pretty much the same. What it allowed us to do by taking some of the professional features of the 9180 and modifying them, we were able to come out with a printer that was lower priced than the 9180.
And what are the two price ranges for those products?
The full retail price on the new 8850 is $549, and the retail price on the 9180, which was still a phenomenal $699.
Wow, those are fantastic prices.
Yes.
Thanks. We'll be looking at a little bit of those later, but before we get going too far, I don't want to leave Ben out of the conversation. And Ben's here to talk about your larger format printers, the Z3100 and 2100. I know there's a lot of them. Give us a breakdown of kind of the different models that are in that large format and where you really see your market for those printers.
Sure. So we've got, like you mentioned, the 2100, the 3100. We also have another one, the 6100, which takes it up into the production category. But much like the B9180 directed at professional photographers, in addition, we've got a good number of labs that are interested in the productivity enhancements in the 6100, and designers using them a lot, pre-press, packaging, all sorts of sort of unique and various applications.
So Ben, tell me a little bit about the actual technology that's built inside, say, for example, the 3100 we have here in the studio.
Yeah, gladly. What I like about the 3100 is the engineers put so much into this. I've been the product manager here now for many months, and I'm still discovering new things that they put into it. And so one of the coolest thing that I think gets overlooked a lot is the ink consumption. And so when you look at the head and the cartridge technology that we built into it, the printer actually can detect as little as a single drop of ink coming out of a nozzle. So when it's going through its cleaning cycle, or when it's making sure that those heads are working appropriately, it can do that with as little as 2 or 3 drops of ink per nozzle. And so, a lot of people have been used to over the years with pigmented printers having to go through these purging cycles, or having a waste tank or something like that. None of that's necessary with this, because it's just such a miserly consumer of ink when it goes through that process. In fact, a great stat that the engineers gave me that I wanted to share was, over the lifespan of the printer, over its expected 5 to 6 year lifespan, it can use as little as 3 milliliters of ink total for all 12 colors, and that's regardless of how many times you've run the cartridges through its cycle and so forth. So yeah, it's a really cool, in terms of its in its downtime and its cycling and keeping those heads working. It's a very low consumption device.
So that leads into kind of maintenance. And you'd think with a large format printer, and again with the B series, of course, it might be hard to maintain with multiple colors and print heads, but I found it to be rather easy and can do it at any time, and replacing a single print head.
Yeah. Well, what's great about that is, again, the engineers thought of that in advance, right? So instead of making it so that you've got this time-consuming process where you're always going in and you're having to fiddle with it, it takes care of as much as possible on its own. And when it does need some sort of intervention by the user, it lets you know. So a good example of that is with the calibration, for example. If you send a file through Photoshop, within the driver, it'll actually tell you, hey, your calibration's out of date. You might want to go ahead and run that. Now, it'll allow you to do it anyway if you want to override it, but it at least gives you that option of saying, whoa, it's time to stop and either run a new profile because I changed the media, or I need to run a calibration because it's been 6 months since I've done so. And it's these little things in there that just sort of overall enhance the productivity and make it a lot easier to use than any previous generation product.
Yeah, and we'll show a little bit of that color center and some things later when we show the demo, because it great way of interaction between the client and the actual printer, which is almost a computer these days. Now, you mentioned about inks, and I want to keep down on this path of inks because we said that there was a new HP ink set, the Vivera ink set, right? Kind of a branded ink set. So, Tom, tell me a little bit about the ink set that's in the B series printers.
The B series printers, both the 8850, the new printer, and the 9180 both incorporate the same ink set. It's 8 individual pigment inks, and those particular pigment inks, or the whole line of pigment inks now, have been tested and are truly the longest life inks that Wilhelm Research has ever tested and the blackest blacks he's ever tested. Those inks run throughout our whole pigment printer family.
So Ben, tell me about the ink set in the Z series, the 2100 and 3100 and 6100 printers.
Well, so what's interesting about the 2100 and the 6100, it uses the identical ink set that is in the B9180. So across the family, it's all the same. It's just basically the size of the cartridge that varies. On the 3100, there is a pretty substantial difference. So that's a 12 ink printer as opposed to an 8 ink for the others. And what we've done there is we've added an additional black ink. We've added some primaries as well, red, green, and blue. And so that helps not only in your gamut overall for your color images, but in your black and white images, you get these true neutral black and white images that have just been, I mean, we've really received some rave reviews and some awards as well on the neutrality, and photographers in particular who are doing a lot of black and white printing just absolutely love it. It's been a really, really key feature. One additional one that we have that's not technically an ink but is included in the 3100 and not in the others is something we call a gloss enhancer. So if you're printing on glossy media, frequently you can see on printers without this something called bronzing. So when you look in areas particularly of shadow detail or you know, where you've got a deep rich black, you can see this kind of a bronzing effect that comes from the ink load. What the gloss enhancer does is it just goes over there with almost kind of like a clear coat, if you will, and it evens out some of that imperfection so that it eliminates bronzing as an image quality problem.
And I've worked with that. It seems like it gives a much better surface and print to that. Will I see any difference between, you know, having an 8 ink print and a 12 ink print? Am I going to get more color, and am I going to get more gamut?
Yeah, so you'll get more gamut on the 3100 for sure because of the primary colors that we've added to it. That's one benefit for it, obviously. If you're doing black and white printing, or if you're doing rather a lot of black and white printing, the 3100 is really the answer. It's, I mean, we just get rave reviews on the black and white. With 4 black inks in it, you can get true neutrals, so you don't have any concerns whatsoever about some metamerism that may be coming up. I mean, it's a true neutral gray or black and white grayscale image that you're getting out of here, and it's just, I mean, it's hands down the best on the market.
So that drives to the point that we're talking about color here today, of course, in this Color Update 08 series, and I'd like to spend a little bit more time talking about the closed loop calibration that is available in the B series. So give us an idea of what is that about and what's the detail on it?
Yeah, and to make the point that the color calibration capability does run throughout the family. So even though we take out the densitometer in the 2100 and put in a spectrophotometer, they still have this basic capability of calibrating themselves. So once we've asked the machine to calibrate itself, and it does do that process, the machine in essence is saying to you, okay, I know where I live in the color world. I know how to make green, I know how to make magenta, I know how to make blue. And if you will then give me a monitor that's calibrated, I can give you that match. The closed loop comes from the term that you have a calibrated monitor and you have a calibrated printer, so they have to produce or reproduce an image that's equivalent to the image that's on the monitor.
Now, this would drive to see why you're maybe partnering with one of our first guests, X-Rite, on the larger format printers. Tell me about that collaboration and technology between X-Rite and HP.
Yeah, so this was actually a pretty lengthy process, but essentially what they did in the overall development of it was they took what was essentially a handheld i1 spectrophotometer and just built it right into the carriage. So for all practical purposes, that's what's inside. And you know, from a specification standpoint, there are some nuances here or there, but it's no different than going out and, you know, spending the $1,000 or so that it costs to get your handheld one and the software, but it's built right in. There's a couple of advantages to that, obviously. Rather than having to go through the process by hand, you've got it built into your device, and you've got automated updates that'll let you know when it's time to calibrate, for example, when it's time to, you know, possibly run a profile that you might want to get dialed in. And I think one of the things that's really key about this is, color is always an issue in all of these customer environments, in photography and graphic design and pre-press. And, what we saw when we were developing this is there's so many different workflows, there's so many different ways to have to manage this on a daily basis. Why don't we take the management out of the color management and just make it automated? And so with the i1 spectrophotometer that's in there, it essentially does a lot of this for you, or with a minimum of work on your part. A couple of clicks. In fact, to create a profile on the Z3100 takes you 3 clicks in about 20 minutes, and that includes the dry time.
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you for all the work you've done for the photographers and graphic designers and audience that are watching the show, all your great information. Keep going on bringing these great products to us, because you guys are doing a great job. Thanks again, Tom. Thanks again, Ben, for your time.
Thanks, Brian.
As you can see, HP has a range of printers from the 13x19 all the way to the large format, and so cost-effective that you can bring high-quality print production to your creative studio or work group. Let's go see these printing technologies in action. And now we're going to talk about profiling your printer and setting it up in the OS. Now, before we actually go and do that, I'd like to spend a minute and talk about paper and ink. It's very important that you know exactly what paper you're using and you're consistent with it. Again, it's that consistency thing, and consistent with your ink set. Now, we have HP printers here, and we use their new Vivera ink set, which is an archival ink, and doesn't have any problems with water or heat also. Now, to prove that, let's take this photo and actually put it right into the water, and we'll get back to that at the very end of our little presentation here, but this shows you some of the archival capabilities of the ink. Now, let's step in and start talking about setting up the actual printers. First is to go in and get the drivers, and you'll notice on screen here I have 2 of the latest drivers that I'm going to use for my printer. One is the HP DesignJet, and the other one is what they call Installer 10.3, 10.4, and 10.5. That's for the 9180. Now, where did I get these? I'm not going off of a CD that I've put into the machine. Well, when they pack up the printer at the factory, they send it to you, you get it inside of a store, you get it at your house or your studio. That's probably a month or so before they've actually burned that CD. The best thing to do is go on the website, HP has a great website for this, and download the latest drivers, and then go ahead and install them. So once you've installed your drivers, or during the installation process, it's going to ask you to bring up the Print and Fax System Preference dialog box. Now you notice here that I've actually installed a lot of these, but let's actually select the plus button to see some of the options that we have inside of the Print and Fax dialog in Leopard. Now you'll notice that I have a lot of printers showing up and different kinds of connections. I have a new 8800 or 8850, which was just released by HP, and that's connected via USB cable. That's fantastic. I can also get some connected via Bonjour, and this is the networking protocol for the Mac. I also have a network printer which has some weird name on that. That's from HP because they are Windows and Mac compatible. This is actually the Windows name. You don't want to select that. You want to go with the Bonjour name. That's the best way to do this. And especially if you have a printer that is Ethernet compatible. That means your small work group can actually work with it. USB printers can be used for a work group. I would have to select that, go into Print and Fax, showing that, and then go into my sharing dialog box and say that I want to turn on the printer sharing for that printer. Now everybody inside my work group can actually see that printer even though it's connected via USB. If your computer shuts down, that printer does go away though. So I do recommend that you probably look at some Ethernet settings for a lot of these printers if you're in a small work group. So now I'm going to close these windows, and I've installed both my printer drivers, and I'm going to go to the HP printer utility. Now my printers have come up, and you can see I have a Z3100, a B8850, and a B9180 that I'm actually working with, and it tells me my different connections and even my details. You'll notice that my last printer, my PhotoSmart Pro 9100 series, has a red house next to it. It means it's actually got a problem, and it does. It's actually turned off right now on the other stage. So I can only work with these two. Now, HP has actually done a great job at working with all of their drivers with Leopard, being able to work with applications like Lightroom, Photoshop, Aperture, and really get the best quality color directly to the printer. And here is where I can actually start working with that. I'm going to select the 3100, and it's brought up all of my information for the actual 3100. If I look at printer status, it's going to show me all of the ink levels that are happening, all of the printer details, the IP address. I can see printer usage. I can go ahead and look up and see what has actually been printed on this printer and what the usages of film and ink. I can look at job accounting. I can see all the different jobs that have actually been processed through this file since we've actually cleared it. I can submit a job, but more important, I can go and calibrate my printer. Now, on the 3100, as we mentioned with other printers, one of the most important things is to be able to calibrate and get a profile of that printer. Now, you can go out to the web and get probably a generic profile for that printer or for some other manufacturers, but we recommend that you profile your exact situation, right? Your printer, your paper, along with whatever ink set you have currently in there. Now, you can do that multiple ways. With the smaller 13 by 19s, you can use the Color Monkey or even go on that with the i1 Pro and use those as calibration tools, printing out a chart and then reading it back in. Or, as we have with the 3100 here, a unique situation, it has the i1 Pro built in. So now I can tell the printer to calibrate itself and give me that profile back. I can look at managed papers, and this is where I can see all of the paper profiles. You notice that I'm actually working with the professional satin photo paper, and on 327 I calibrated it and I have the profiles available to me so I can work with these in my applications. And now I have an exact match of what I'm printing to. You notice that there are some papers that I haven't calibrated for a while, and these are obsolete now. The printer actually knows that I need to recalibrate when I put that new roll of paper in. Now, say I don't have a paper that I know about. The HPs I do, if they're satin, whatever, but I can also go ahead and create and install an ICC profile. I can create the profile, and when the printer brings it back in, it will bring in the paper into effect. I can also do HP Professional emulation and create 90% of the spot colors directly on the 3100. All of this is accessible by the printer utility. If I go back out and select the 8850, one tool allows me to control all of my printers. I can see the supply status, device information, and again, I can do a color calibration or a closed loop calibration, as I call it from HP, on these smaller 13 by 19 printers. And if I have a calibrated display, I now have a calibrated device and I have a color workflow. So I've set up all of my printers. Let's go into Aperture and actually print something out. Now here's a photo again from California State Parks of Fort Ord. Let's actually bring up our projects. And it looks great on screen. Now I'm going to go ahead and hit the Command P button and print. The print dialog box comes up, and as you'll notice inside of Aperture, it's a little bit different. It's got settings that I can set up, or presets. And I've actually set up a preset for my 3100. It changes my printer selection. You notice that it mimics what I had inside of my HP printer utility. And I can go into printer settings right here and bring up the print dialog box. Looks a little bit different in Aperture too, if you're not familiar with it yet. I bring up color options, and again, you'll see that I have application managed color versus printer managed colors. You always want to select application managed colors. The only time you'd ever want to go to a printer managed colors if you're dealing with something like a tri-colored ink 4x6 or something that really can't recreate the color that you're using. It's not a proofing device, it's more of a just home device. Then you'd want to select printer managed colors because it's going to give you the best color for that tricolor ink or that device. But for us, we're professionals, we're going to select application managed colors. And I'm also going to select the Pantone emulation just for the 3100. And now I can go down to image quality, and here's where I select my paper. And I'm going to go again with professional satin photo paper. I'm going to select a custom quality option and go best and maximum detail. This is going to push a 16-bit color image down to the printer That's maximum detail for each of my applications. And for the gloss enhancer, I'm just going to do econo mode versus whole page and hit save. Now this setting is saved, and I can hit the save button again. So every time I click on it, it's going to have all of that information inside of the dialog box, including, again, I have to select here my paper information, professional satin photo paper. Again, that's the profile that I'm actually going to print to. And if you'll notice on screen, as I select black point compensation, it actually changes the color of the image. I'm printing directly now, so I am going to use some black point compensation. And let's hit print. Off it goes and processes directly down to the printer. No other dialog box is out of Aperture. That's one of the reasons why I like the application so much. Now we can go into other applications like Lightroom. I can select the print dialog box from there also. Select the printer that I want, say my 3100. I'm going to select my 8850. And then I have some other presets that I can work with. Say I want my 9100, or I can actually change these by going again down to paper type and quality, selecting my color options or paper, maximum DPI, professional photo satin paper. Again, it looks like a lot of dialog boxes, but it's important to make sure that you hit all the right paper choices as you go through, because if you send it down differently, it's going to use a whole different profile looking totally different than your final output. If I go to color matching on this one, again, you can see it's grayed out, but it says color sync, so we're good. And I'll go ahead and print that one also. Now down in my dock, you'll see that I have some printer cues that have showed up. I've got a cue for the DesignJet 3100. It's actually spooling the job for me. And now I brought up the 8850, and it's bringing up the actual file and processing, giving me a process complete. Now, this is a true print spooler. I can pause this at any time and tell the printer to go on hold. I can go ahead and grab that file, resume it, maybe hold that file. Easy flexibility in the print and fax area to work directly with that driver and start working with it. So now while our print is actually printed out, let's go back to our demonstration on ink and paper. Now we've had this in the water here for our whole demonstration. As I pull it out, you'll see it's still intact. It's a little wet, but the ink hasn't run, and it is truly archival and not worrying about water or heat. A great thing when you're talking about dealing with pieces that are going to be long-lasting or keeping your photos around for a long time. Well, our print is done, and this is our final goal, to get a good-looking print. And we've actually managed the color from camera, picking our color space, going in and calibrating our screen, working with our applications, and now printing and profiling our printers so that we have a consistent, accurate color workflow. I'm Brent Haley, and it's been great being your host for the Color Update 08 seminar series. If you'd like to see some of the other series, please visit us at lefthandman.com/nowplaying. And everyone here at Left Hand Man Studios, thanks you for viewing.